Is it the gadgets that we own? Is it getting that promotion at work? Is it spending time with our loved ones? Or is it the balance of our bank account? According to the Oxford Dictionary, the definition of happiness is the feeling that you have when things give you pleasure, whereas contentment is the quieter feeling you get when you have learned to find pleasure in smaller things. The well-known Henry Ford noted that wealth, like happiness, is never attained when sought after directly. Rather, it comes as a byproduct, offering a service to others. So tonight we'll explore this topic of the pursuit of happiness from a Vedic perspective. And we are honoured to welcome back His Holiness Bhakti Rasamrita Swami. His Holiness holds an MBA from Bombay University, and he worked at a large multinational bank before dedicating his life to sharing the practical teachings of the Bhagavad-Gita. Please join me in welcoming His Holiness.
Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Vitapadakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavanscha Shri Rupam Sakrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Varijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatharine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. A very good evening to everyone. It's a nice, warm and pleasant evening with an extraordinary view sitting here. I'm happy to be back again at this program organized by Veda London in ENY. This is my third program here. And the topic I've been requested to speak on today is the pursuit of happiness, the search for inner joy. The word pursuit reminds us of a chase. We're chasing. And somehow the pursuit of happiness seems to be a chase that never ends. It's on and on and on. You know, we have many proverbs in India from where I come, and many folk tales. So I'd like to share one or two of them with you, because they seem to be relevant. One of the little proverbs that we find is about a donkey that's used as a load bearer for a washerman. You have automated laundries here. But in the old days, in the villages in India, we had manual washing. You had a washerman who collected your clothes, would take it to the riverside, pack it all on the back of a donkey, carry it to the riverside, wash the clothes there, dry them on the banks, and then bring the clothes back. And many times donkeys, being donkeys, would be hesitant to move. So they would induce the donkeys to move by tying a stick to its neck and then dangling a carrot at the other end of the stick. So the donkey would see that carrot, a luscious, delicious carrot, and would take one step forward, thinking that perhaps now he would get that carrot. But he did realize that with every step forward, the carrot also moved one step forward. And this went on all the way till the river. And then he waited till the washerman finished his business, and on the way back, the same story repeated itself. And then he would get the carrot at the end of it, 1 carrot, and then it was worth it all. So this is something like our search for happiness. We work hard, we struggle, and at the end of it is a little carrot. Pleasure is not the same thing as happiness. And in our search for happiness, we end up with a little bit of pleasure, a lot of pain, a lot of struggle, a lot of anxiety, and we consider that a little bit of pleasure, which has come at a huge cost of pain and inconvenience, to be worth our while. And therefore we equate pleasure with happiness. There's also that funny folk tale, which we've heard from our childhood about, once again, coming to donkeys and washermen. There was a donkey who was grazing. He was a free animal. He was grazing, eating grass, and he happened to spot another donkey, and he recognized him as his old school friend. And he went up to him and they exchanged notes and said, "So, hello, my dear friend, how are you? It's been such a long time since we met. How are things?" and so on. And then they exchanged notes about what they were doing. And so the first donkey said, "I'm just moving around, I eat grass wherever it's available, I'm a free bird, I'm happy." And he asked the other one, "What do you do?" He said, "I work for the washerman." He said, "Really? And what does your work involve?" When he'd heard the description, the first donkey was saying, "That's a lot of work. So why do you do so much work over there?" He said, "It's because, well, okay, let me tell you the story," he said. My boss, the washerman, he has a daughter. She's a very beautiful young lady. And one day, the daughter committed some mistakes. So the boss was very unhappy. The father was so angry with her that in his anger, he spoke harshly and said, "You are such a silly girl that I will get you married to my donkey." So I'm waiting for that day when that will happen. So in the hope that that will happen one day, I continue my work for the washerman. And so our search for happiness goes on in this world. We work, work, work. We're tired of work. We try to enjoy. It doesn't seem to give us something substantial. The struggle just continues. Much like an animal trying to chase its own tail. Round and round and round. The search goes on endlessly. Happiness remains something so elusive. Something tantalizingly nearby. But when you go to get it, it slips out of your grasp and leaves behind something that you didn't anticipate. Some pain, some inconvenience. And actually, the struggle for happiness is natural because, as I was just mentioning to our friend Amit here, that happiness is everybody's business. It's our business, it's our natural business. We all want to be happy. Whether we are atheists, whether we are believers, whether we believe in one ideology or another, one thing that unites us all is that we seek happiness. There's no one who goes to a place of worship or has any ideology that says, well, I want some pain, I want distress in life. But the point is, this search for happiness is moving outwards. And it's going outwards further and further away as the days go by. And this search for happiness outwards is being fueled by an elaborate machinery for propaganda on behalf of certain entities who seek profit for themselves at our expense. And so this huge propaganda machinery of advertising is so tantalizing, it is so bewildering, it is so alluring that we get captivated much like moths flying into a little fire. So we run after the things of this world. Just walk down any street in any major city of the world, and what will you see? All sorts of products being advertised and displayed. And with the promise, the lure, you just use this product, you will be happy. You do this, you will be happy. So false promises of happiness being offered to us at every turn, at every step of life in our existence here. It's all pervasive. It's in the media. It's all your senses are subsumed. There is an assault of this propaganda at every moment of our life. And this propaganda, this assault is so strong that it becomes part of our thinking. It enters into the deepest recesses of our consciousness and it becomes us. It becomes our philosophy, our ideology. This is what will make me happy. If I just get that type of shoe, I buy this kind of a jacket, I get that electronic gizmo, I do this such and such thing, I eat at such and such a restaurant, I go to such and such a tourist place for my holidays, and I do recreational activities of this sort, then I will be happy. So it's a whole big propaganda game that is inducing us, motivating us, compelling us, driving us to enjoy goods and services. And this is called consumerism. Consumerism is an ideology or an economic or social order that says that you should consume goods and services in ever-increasing quantities. Just go on consuming more. The more you consume, the more you will be happy. So we have an unwritten but very strongly entrenched fallacious philosophy, which is, to express it in the form of an equation, that consumerism equals happiness and satisfaction. So the more you consume, the more happy you will be. So accumulate things, be in the acquisitive mode, acquire more and more and more. So the acquisition, possession, and consumption of more and more is our standard of perceived happiness. But things don't work like that. In fact, the exact opposite is the reality. Why so? Because the things of this world do not have the innate or intrinsic capacity to give us happiness. They cannot do that. It's not in them. And therefore, when we acquire some object that we had desired and we struggle to obtain it, now we find that we are tiring of it. It doesn't give us the kind of pleasure that we thought it would when we wanted to acquire it and when we did acquire it. And we tire of the things that we have. Now these very things that apparently would have given us pleasure some time ago become sources of disappointment for us. And because we tire of the old things that we have, we seek new things. And this creates a relentless search for new things. And something that makes us tired of everything else that we have. So the modern day structure of the world and the way the economics and technology and the production and everything is geared is just towards this. Somehow, not just provide you with more and more things, but ensure, if it hasn't happened already to you, that you get tired of what you have and you seek more and more and more. So there is something called planned obsolescence. You plan your product in such a way that it will become obsolete very soon. And today, consumerism has reached such a peak that planned obsolescence means that your product will get out of date or it will lose its charm for you in absurdly short intervals of time. So you buy your your mobile phone, and you find within another month or two or a few months, there's another model that comes up that looks so nice, and you want to give this up and go for the other one because it has so many exciting features. Or your laptop, or whatever else it is that you have. But just consider the scenario 50 years ago, 70 years ago. You got a product that lasted you for your whole life. You were happy with it. It was rugged, it was sturdy, it fulfilled its job. You got what you wanted from it throughout your life. And your next generation also enjoyed that. But nowadays, that's not the case. Because this madness of consumerism has just become so deeply entrenched into our psyche that we are like addicts. So the modern consumerist society is not giving us happiness. In the name of happiness, it is giving us two things, addiction and envy. Addiction to have these things and want them, and being envious of those who have them when I don't have them. So this is the result of this consumerist society. It is dangling before us false conceptions of happiness. And the whole game is just to increase the production. It goes on and on and on, but it's only disappointing. Sooner or later, we all get disappointed. There's this little folk tale about a king who was going in the forest and he met this ascetic. This ascetic was dressed in tree bark, whereas the king was dressed in all his royal finery, silken clothes. And he saw this ascetic and said, you know, you're just wearing tree bark. I'm a king. I can give you wonderful clothes to wear. You don't have to be living like this. So the ascetic replied, my dear king, you get pleasure from these silken clothes. I get pleasure from the tree bark. The pleasure that you get is the same as the pleasure that I get. We are equal in terms of pleasure. It's not the silken cloth that is giving you pleasure, neither is it the tree bark that is giving you pleasure, it's our mind. Satisfaction. If you're satisfied with what you have, then who is rich and who is poor? So happiness comes not merely from running after the external objects and things of this world, including money, but it comes from a certain higher contentment that we feel internally. Aristotle also said, contentment is actual wealth, and luxury is artificial poverty. Because no matter how much luxury you have, if you're not contented from within, no amount of luxury, no amount of possession of goods will give us happiness. Contentment is the first step towards happiness. And in our search for acquiring more and more in this mode of consumption, we recklessly ruin the earth. Consumerism is the mother of all environmental problems. It is because of this that we have the environmental crisis today. The tragedy of our times is that we have lost the ability to distinguish between need and greed. The two are now conflated, equated. So everything I want is what I feel I need. But that's not the case. What I need is something quite different from what I want, because there's no limit to what I want. I could want. And therefore we see today that as a society, as a human society worldwide, we are running approximately a 130% overdraft. You know what an overdraft is? When you withdraw from your bank, say 30% more than what you have, it's not a sustainable thing. You have to replenish it. In other words, what we are doing is we consume 30% more than what we replace in nature. It's very important. And if we were to consume the way we are consuming now, especially the quote-unquote first world, then we would need 6 planet Earths. Clearly an unsustainable way forward. In the last 50 to 60 years, humanity has used up more of the natural resources of the planet Earth than humanity has for all of history till 1950 or so. Can you imagine the rate at which we are accelerating the devastation and chaos? So therefore, obviously, there's something wrong with our modern popular paradigm. It's not giving us happiness, and therefore we see, despite so much wealth, despite the razzle-dazzle, the glitter and glamour of the modern day world, especially as evinced in the modern metropolitan cities, people are depressed. People are not happy. The incidence of psychological problems, mental problems has increased. Many research studies have shown that actually we are much worse off in terms of our subjective happiness, our internal state of being, despite all our plethora of goods, than were our grandfather's generation, who may not have had so many goods as we do, but the quality of their life was much better. So in this search for happiness, we evolve and concoct new and newer philosophies with a surge outwards. And we often intellectualize them and couch them in very sophisticated language and apparently very, shall we say, broad-minded and noble ideals, like liberalism, for example. So the modern liberal ideal is that I should have unrestricted freedom to enjoy and attempt to enjoy whatever I like, provided I don't harm others. Now this philosophy may sound very nice, because it's, well, so long as I don't harm others, what is the problem? Because I should have freedom to experiment as I wish, to live as I wish. It's my free choice. So in our modern day society, we place undue and excessive emphasis on individuality to the peril of our collective life as human beings, living in a family or as a society. We place excessive importance on our personal freedoms to the exclusion of any restrictions. We rebel, we recoil at the very mention of anyone trying to restrict our personal freedoms and our attempts at finding happiness through experimenting with whatever our mind says. Because my mind says something, I want to do this, I should be allowed to do it, and nobody should say anything because it's my free will, it's my freedom. But this kind of philosophy will clearly not lead us to any degree of happiness. It isn't. Some years ago, maybe just a year or two ago, a very famous stand-up comedian committed suicide. He was American. And it sent shockwaves throughout the world. How could somebody who was such a comedian, a fabulous comedian at that in popular perception, he was making people laugh, but he was so depressed from within that he committed suicide. Which brings us to the idea that making people laugh, or humor, or even for that matter, pleasure, is not happiness. So therefore we have a person who gave others pleasure, who made others laugh, but was terribly unhappy from within. Very recently, as of maybe a few days or a few weeks ago, I believe I don't listen to modern music, but I read the newspaper headlines, which said that one famous singer, part of a famous band, he committed suicide, and that also sent shockwaves. And that's something that we've seen over the decades. You know, many famous musicians and singers have committed suicide. Many of them have died unnatural deaths. Many of them have drugged themselves to death. They've all had miserable lives, many of them. So in this search for freedom and happiness, we just cross the lines. We want to do whatever we want. But this unrestricted freedom is a recipe for disaster, for chaos. One man's food is another man's poison. So even though I may say that you have the full freedom to exercise your desires to enjoy life as you want, provided it doesn't harm me, but the point is that we are living in a world that is highly interdependent, with all sorts of conflicting interests. So when you try to exercise your freedom to have pleasure, I find it annoying, and vice versa. And that's why you find so much conflict in this world and no happiness. So clearly the formula that each of us should be just left to ourselves to do whatever we want in our search for happiness, provided I don't harm somebody else, will not work. It is not working, it never worked. So we need to look at some other models. There is some other dimension that we need to look at. Let me ask you a question. If I want to be a doctor, can I say, well, I'll just do my own thing and become a doctor? You wouldn't take this seriously. You see, that's not possible. You can't just do your own thing and be a doctor. You have to follow a certain protocol. You have to follow a certain regimen that is given by somebody, by some authority like a well-known university and so on. You have to train under certain qualified doctors and teachers. You can't just do your own thing and become a doctor. Similarly, let's say someone wants to become a really top-class, world-class footballer. Can you say, I want to do my own thing and become a footballer? No. Look at all the top football clubs and the football teams. They have coaches who are paid the earth. And they're sacked the moment they're not successful. They're paid multi-million-dollar fees. And the coach has a big job at his hand. He practically controls the lives of the players, including their personal life, what they eat, who they live with, what they do with their recreational time. And they have to follow such a rigid discipline. It's not enough to have talent. You have to go through that whole regimen and training. You have to follow that protocol and the discipline. So, no one can say, I'll be a top-class footballer just by doing my own thing. So similarly, happiness is a science. Happiness is a skill that has to be learned. And therefore we need to be trained. Therefore we need to subject ourselves to some discipline, to some regimen, to some protocol. So the idea that I will do whatever I like and no one should say anything about it is something that is not conducive. It doesn't make sense. Why should everything else be amenable to discipline, but only happiness, I can be undisciplined. I can do whatever I like. It's not a very reasonable proposition. So then, what kind of discipline, what kind of life shall we follow? What kind of ideology shall we follow for happiness? What is happiness anyway? And here we come to the ancient wisdom of the Bhagavad-Gita. Now we begin to talk business. Now we are talking. As I said earlier, happiness is everybody's business. This is our real business. But somehow we do the business wrong. So in the Bhagavad-Gita, we have very nice things, very wonderful things that are told to us about happiness. So how does one define happiness? Happiness is our natural condition. This is as succinct and pithy a definition of happiness as anyone can give. But the important question arises, what is the meaning of that term our? What is the definition of me? Who am I? The modern day society is plagued by a conception of bodily consciousness, that I am the body. But I am not the body. I am the soul. I am a spiritual entity. And therefore, happiness is the natural condition of my soul, of me, the soul. Let me ask you a question. You don't have to answer it verbally, but you can answer it in your mind. Which is the most widely followed religion in the world today? And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking of one of two or three or four religious faiths. But my thinking is a little different. My thinking is the most widely followed religion in the world is not A, B, or C that you're thinking, but the most widely followed religion in the world is materialism. That's the greatest religion going on today. Everybody's following it. Regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their nationality, gender, their persuasions, regardless of what religious faith they follow, everybody has this one religion in common, materialism. Even religion is tainted heavily with materialism. True religion is that which is selfless, and we'll come to that shortly. But here we have everything in our life being tainted by some selfish interest, some gross material interest. This materialism has percolated down into the essence of our beings, almost. So our conception of life is materialistic. Our conception of happiness is materialistic, based on the idea that I am this body, and to maximize the pleasures of this body, to minimize the distresses of this body is happiness. But this is a false premise. From the point of view of the Bhagavad-Gita, we understand that we are the eternal spirit souls. And the natural condition, the original situation of the soul is happiness. So happiness is a thing we really don't know. We do not have a conception of what happiness really means. We think of happiness in terms of pleasure. The pleasures of this body, the pleasures of this world. But that is not happiness. Happiness is something that's quite different, in a different league altogether. Real happiness transcends anything and everything of this world. So therefore our search has to be not outwards, as is the norm now, but it has to be inwards. And that is where the Bhagavad-Gita helps us. We take this transcendental, this spiritual wisdom from this great ancient text, and we will learn what true happiness really is. You've all heard of musk perfume. Musk is a substance that is very fragrant, and therefore many of the perfumes commercially available are made from the concentrate, musk concentrate. Now the musk perfume originally comes from the musk deer. And the musk deer is found in the Himalayas. And a very strange thing about the musk deer is that the musk, there is a secretion from its body from which the concentrate comes. Now when this musk deer secretes this, that secretion from its body emits such an intoxicating fragrance that the deer goes mad. The deer just gets wild. It just wants to get to the source of that fragrance. But it doesn't realize that the fragrance is emanating from its own body. The fragrance coming from its own secretions pervades the space around in such a way that the musk deer is unable to fathom the source of that. And it runs in search of that fragrance. You know, animals have a very strong sense of smell. They understand the quality of things by smell. Therefore you see dogs and cats and animals, they sniff at everything. And when that is excited, the sense of smell is excited, they get worked up. So this musk deer gets so worked up that it just runs through the forest and through the hills, searching for the source of that fragrance, not realizing that the fragrance is right there in its own body. And eventually it gets so exhausted that it falls down and dies. But then the hunter comes along, the merchant comes along, and then extracts all that musk and makes some super profits. That's exactly our situation. We are looking for happiness, running in the forest of this material world, here and there. Maybe I'll get it from this shop, from this product, from this activity, from this money, whatever it is. And we run and run and run and run all our life, and then at the end of life, we fall down dead. Never having achieved happiness, only to begin another term of another futile chase in the next life. Not realizing that we are the spirit soul. The soul is eternal according to Bhagavad-Gita. The body is temporary and perishable. When the body is destroyed, as it must eventually by the laws of nature, the soul occupies another body, and the same futile search continues on and on and on. But the Bhagavad-Gita says, no, we must realize that we are not this body, we are the spirit soul, we are by nature constitutionally happy. And what is the nature of this happiness? The nature of this happiness, very interestingly enough, is love. But not the love of this world. The love which is, the term which is so casually bandied about by people. The music star on the stage says, I love all of you. That's not love. Or even when people tell each other, they feel very attracted to each other, love at first sight, and they say, I love you very much. It's not love. There is just superficial attraction for this decaying flesh. I'm sorry. Am I being too harsh? That is why you have a multi-billion-dollar cosmetic industry. You have a multi-billion-dollar fashion industry to hide the truth. We don't want to face the truth because it is so inconvenient. It is so tough to face the reality of what my body actually is. The whole civilization is geared at just shoving it under the carpet, at clouding it, at covering it. The natural condition of the body is not pleasant, but we try to make it pleasant by so many other things. And then we try to derive pleasure through these things. So therefore the love of this world also is not really love. Real love is something that is spiritual, and that is the nature of the soul, and that love is meant only for one entity, and that is the Supreme Soul, the Super Soul. In the Bhagavad-Gita, we understand that Supreme Soul to be Krishna. It's a Sanskrit term It's a Sanskrit word that means all attractive. So the Supreme Soul, the origin of all the souls, and the origin of the entire world and the entire creation is Krishna. You may call him God, you may call him by any other similar name, but he is all attractive. In the Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna introduces himself. The word Bhagavat means coming from Bhagavan. Bhagavan means God, the source of everything, the possessor of all opulences to an unlimited degree. And Gita means a song. So the Bhagavad-Gita literally means the song of God. So Lord Krishna speaks this sublime philosophy to his dear devotee and friend Arjuna. And he introduces himself as the origin of everything, the source of everything and everyone. He is the object of ultimate knowledge. Real knowledge means to know him, our source. Knowledge of this world is also important, undoubtedly, but it is relative knowledge. It is not, shall we say, happiness knowledge. It is bread and butter knowledge. But happiness knowledge is to know about Krishna, because Krishna is our source. We come from him. And the soul has an eternal relationship of love with that eternal Supreme Soul, Krishna, the ultimate spiritual entity. This relationship of love is synonymous with happiness. So on the spiritual platform, happiness is love and love is happiness. We are also seeking love in this world, but we experience disappointments, rejection, and pain in experimenting and trying out different types of love. But one person who will never fail us, one type of love that will never disappoint us, is our relationship of love with Krishna that exists on an eternal platform. We are lovers of Krishna, even now, but we have forgotten. You know, sometimes when a person has a traumatic accident, one of the results of that trauma is amnesia. You know, you forget who you are, what you are, etc. So also, because of our contact, by our I mean the soul, because of our contact with this world, we have been covered over by the propaganda of this world. That's called Maya in Sanskrit. Maya means illusion. Ma-ya, that which is not. So when we consider that which is not to be the reality, that's called Maya or illusion. So we are not this body, but we think, I am this body. That's Maya. Happiness will not come by trying to enjoy this body and the things of this world, or we think like that, so that is illusion, that is Maya. But when we come to the Bhagavad-Gita and we try to understand that happiness is something much more sublime, it is something pure, something blissful, ecstatic, then we begin really talking business of happiness. So we have to revive that relationship of love with Krishna. And as we progressively go on this path of reviving this relationship by getting to know him, then we experience step by step some inner happiness that is different from the pleasure we experience when we try to exploit the resources of nature around us, including our body. So this is a step-by-step progressive endeavor. So how do we get to know Krishna? How do you get to know anybody? You get to know his name or her name, you understand what that person does, you talk to that person, So also you interact with that person. So we also interact with Krishna. How? Primarily through the chanting of his names. You know, when you mention somebody's name, immediately that person's picture comes into your mind. You think of that person. Think of anybody. Say some name in your mind. Immediately think of that person. So when you chant Krishna's names, you think of Krishna. Krishna is the most beautiful, attractive personality. Many of you have seen pictures of Krishna. If you haven't, we'd invite you. Do we have some books? We can arrange. So there's some nice books that can give you some nice pictures of Krishna. But he's a rather unconventional looking person. Because he's neither white, nor black, nor brown, nor he's blue. So the real blues music, I wish, was, they get you out of the blues, they say, then come to this blue personality. And you'll find real happiness. The love that we experience when we serve Krishna will grow continuously till we attain the stage of complete purity in that love. And then we will not have to take birth again in this material world. We will become really, truly free. The soul, being spiritual, doesn't belong here to this material world. The soul belongs to another dimension, to another world, the spiritual world. We belong there, and we need to go there. And the process for going there is to serve Krishna, to get to know Krishna, chant his names in this world. Then we become eligible or qualified to enter into that most wondrous kingdom for eternal, blissful life in the association of Krishna and his loving devotees. So the process of getting to know Krishna is called Bhakti Yoga. The word yoga is very popular now, but usually people have a very limited understanding of it in terms of just performing some exercises, but they don't have a philosophy behind it. It's very important to understand the philosophy behind yoga. The word yoga comes from the Sanskrit word yuj, which means to link. To link with whom? To link with God, to link with Krishna. So when you try to link with Krishna through bhakti, which means love, that is called Bhakti Yoga. And this is the easiest, the topmost, and the most sublime way of linking with Krishna now and forever. So I would invite you all to explore this science of happiness, which is also called Krishna consciousness. To be conscious with love of Krishna, our source, our origin, our true love. Here is that love affair you've been always looking for in all these millions of lives in this material world. You never found it. An eternal loving relationship with Krishna. That is the true inner joy, true happiness of life. And this is the message that the world needs at this time. And at any time, but especially at this time. For those of you who are not familiar with the science of Krishna consciousness, I would heartily invite you and encourage you to commence this most exciting journey. There are many in this room who would be happy to assist you. And for those of you who have already embarked on this journey, please continue on and share the happiness, the true happiness that you're experiencing in the course of this journey with others. I'd like to thank the Veda London and the ENY Hindu Forum for jointly having organized this program. It's always a pleasure to be here, and especially with such an attentive audience. And as I looked around, I saw that not a single person nodded off to sleep. That gives me a little happiness too. So thank you for being such an attentive and patient audience. And I think we will now leave the floor open for questions. Feel free to ask any questions, and I will try to answer them. Do we have, maybe you can just raise your hand and ask from where you are. Do we have a mic? Yes, we have one. So if you raise your hand, then the mic will come up to you.
Thank you for a wonderful class. You rightly pointed out lots of defects with the modern way of living. You talked about consumerism, and you cited some amazing examples of celebrities who seem to have everything and then maybe drug themselves in order to find real happiness. The one thing I struggled with was that makes sense if it's taken to an extreme. So we certainly agree that if your entire life is fully dedicated to just obtaining things, then most people will agree that things don't make you happy. But for most of us in this room, it isn't a life of extremes. It's some balance. And those things, that new iPhone, there isn't an expectation that it will make us ecstatic, but it makes us happy.
The dividing line between what is excessive and what isn't is very fine. It is so intoxicating. You know, this whole electronic gadgetry and this whole glamorous civilization. Yes? And when you have one, it consumes you. Takes up your life. It's a little thing. It takes up your life. And we think it's just a harmless little thing, but it, as I say in America, it ain't. It takes up everything of your life. Well, as a practical necessity, yes, all right, we are living in this modern day world, we have a job, we obviously need a phone, all right. So as I was mentioning last year, I remember, that use them as tools, but we shouldn't become tools in the hands of these gadgets. And that requires a lot of wisdom. It requires a lot of mental equanimity and some understanding and determination to know where to draw the line. Utility, yes, so it serves a useful function, so we use it. But very often people get carried away. Mostly as you walk, if you look on the streets, what are people doing? They're looking down. Yes? They're not looking at, if you're sitting in the tube. Last year when I came, or a year before I think, I came by the tube. And practically not a single person made eye contact with me because they were doing this. They were texting or whatever it is that they were doing. They were onto their phones. So, you know, they wouldn't talk to anybody next to them because the curious thing about this is that you're very close to somebody in America because you're texting that person, but you're very distant from the person right next to you. Physically. This is the paradox. So yes, use them as tools, but be cautious and cultivate the spiritual consciousness that is necessary for us to get closer to Krishna. So that is our safeguard against being carried away with these gadgets. Is there any question? Other question? Yes. Can you have the mic there, please? Yeah, we can.
I'll try my vocal cords then.
Okay, then I think maybe the mic will come to you. Right. Should just remember that. Yeah, you have a question?
Thank you. Hello. Anyone knows how to?
Is it on?
Yeah, this is not about iPhone. It's about my personal inquiry within myself every time, every day. Is the purpose of life in my own very personal nature of experiences and my whatever 40 plus years. I just think sometimes I'm too busy because the very nature, the Maya or the Ajnana in my case is just to keep myself busy in pursuit of one material thing or the other. I mean, a couple of years back it was iPhone 6 and now it's iPhone 8 or 7.6 something. So it's incrementally the definition of what I have to go for in my tomorrow's shopping pursuit is changing. But there's something that I'm lacking today. But if I just pan back 5 years ago, whatever I had as a wish list is all really, I've got more than that, about 20 times, about 30 times. So I always, one thing I always use as a measure is my marriage, for example. I mean, I can speak about it freely. My wife is a few hundred miles away. I don't know whether it was happiness or happy mass. But there's a lot of happy things there. So I always get confused. Did I ask for it really? Or did I get more than what I asked for? Sometimes the maintenance of that concept of marriage, for example. I'm just taking that as an example, really. It takes more energy from me. So day after day, I'm just confused. What am I chasing?
Yes, and your confusion is well founded. You are in the same situation that most people in the world are in. And that was the topic of the talk today. And that's why we need to take recourse to books of wisdom, of spiritual wisdom. And you mentioned that there was one thing lacking, you didn't know what it was lacking. One thing lacking is Krishna. The all-attractive love of your life. That's the only lack in the world. It's the one switch, which if you switch on, everything else will become all right. Is there any other question? Did you have a question? Okay.
Thank you for the talk. I think the thing is, some of it seems a fundamental part of human nature. It seems to be innate within us to sort of want that bigger house or the bigger car, and that will make us happier, more space, more holidays. And I think that's, how to battle that is hard. That seems to be quite a difficult thing to do. Obviously there's that idealism of inner happiness, but you can't, there seems to be, and maybe this is mine, seems to be this sort of this feeling that these things will make you happy, and that's quite a hard battle to overcome.
Yes, indeed, because the waves of Maya, of propaganda of this world are extremely strong. And therefore we need very strong spiritual company. We need regular spiritual practices which will keep us anchored properly in spiritual understanding, so that we don't get swayed by too many material desires. Naturally, we have to have some desires to live and survive in this world. But as simple a life as is necessary for us is what is good for our spiritual development and eventually for our happiness in life. So we have to temper the desires that well up in our heart with the realism of spiritual knowledge and calm it down and say, well, I may have these ambitions, but ultimately, is it going to help me to be happy? Is it going to help those I love happy? Is it going to make them happy? So therefore, hearing this knowledge, discussing it, reading it, studying it, and applying it in life as a practitioner is the way forward. Okay.
Can I ask, Maharaj, many of us work in the city where consumerism is high and we're striving to do well in our careers. How do we balance this with spiritual practice on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, how do we balance spiritual practice with our regular life? We're going to work, we're living in a metropolis like London. Yes, that's an important question. It's a question of our time management, of doing the important things first, giving priority to what's really important in our life, and working our material life around the spiritual goals rather than the other way around. So it's not that we say, well, my life is like this, and then I'll try to squeeze out whatever little time I can for a little spiritual activity here and a little something there. Rather, we should turn it around and think, this is what I want to do in my life. This is how I want to attain happiness through the spiritual path, through Krishna consciousness. And so let me now adjust my work and my the other aspects of my life relative to that, rather than the other way around. And then sure enough, we will be very careful to analyze how we are spending our time. And we'll make sure we don't waste any time. We'll make sure we utilize all the spare time we have from our work for our spiritual upliftment. So intelligent time management and prioritization of our spiritual goal will do the needful.
Thank you, Maharaj, for a wonderful talk. We often think darkness as the lack of light, but I don't think we can define happiness as lack of unhappiness. This materialism drives us more towards acquiring more positive than just leveling out the negative, which is the suffering. And I guess the balance is the key for contentment. So just going away from happiness and talking about contentment, how can we be contented when we know that happiness is not achieved by wealth, things, people, and beings? I guess what we are really striving for is contentment rather than happiness.
Actually, on the contrary, we are looking for happiness, not peace. You see, peace or contentment is neutral. Contentment or peace is the absence of discord, the absence of pain, of quarrel, of unhappiness. So at the very least, we have to be that. And the happiness, the concept of happiness that people have in this world today is exactly that. It's absence or relief from pain and distress. But that is not the concept of happiness as we understand it from the Bhagavad-Gita. The concept of happiness in the Bhagavad-Gita is it's something positive. We understand negative happiness, which is pain. We understand positive happiness in this world to be pleasure, but that's not pain. And then there's contentment. So we say at least be content. Don't try to seek too much of a material platform. Be content with what your destiny has provided for you. And now seek something that is real, not the illusory thing, real happiness, which is our original condition. And the process of Krishna consciousness is actually to invoke that dormant happiness and love that is already innate in us. It is the intrinsic characteristic of the soul to be happy. So all we have to do is to let it wake up. is asleep, so to speak, at this point in time, and we have to awaken it by spiritual practice. Unless something is dormant within you, you cannot bring it out by practice. Inasmuch as a child can learn to walk because the walking propensity is dormant within it. But the flying ability is not dormant in the human child. So no matter how much the human child tries to flap his hands and fly, it will never be able to fly because it doesn't have the dormant capacity, the innate capacity. So similarly, love of God and happiness is innate to the soul. And the soul is asleep. So now we are practicing spirituality to awaken the soul, to bring out that which is already existing within, but which we are unaware of. That is this whole process of Krishna consciousness. Okay. Any other questions?
Oh, I do have a question I'd like to ask.
Yes.
Would you be able to share the journey that you took in your pursuit for happiness?
Could you please repeat the question?
Would you share the journey that you took
For the journey. Okay.
that in order for you to find the happiness that you were looking for?
Okay. Well, nothing very dramatic. Nothing sensational. Nothing that is the stuff of any articles or anything of the sort. It is just that I met a few practitioners of Krishna consciousness. I read the Bhagavad-Gita and the books connected with that. And I understood this is what reality is, and this is what I should be doing. And I realized the sheer futility of everything else. And therefore I took up this path, and no regrets. And I assure you, if you take up this path, you'll also have no regrets. Nothing very dramatic, very simple.
Any more questions from the
I think one of the major challenges a lot of people face when they sort of embark on this journey is sort of the fear of missing out. So maybe you've experienced it as well, sort of going through your journey. But it's maybe some people, maybe fear and maybe not having the latest iPhone or latest car or latest house or many other things that materialism sort of makes us want to desire. So what advice would you say to people that are sort of going through that challenge but have the fear of missing out on those sort of things?
Let's say there's a man who's very poor and he's eating only some dried crumbs of bread and some overripe fruit. And then somebody comes along and gives him a fabulous meal. Freshly cooked, warm, hot, delicious meal. He's going to take it. Yes? Will he miss out on what he was doing before? No. Why not? Because he's got something so much better. When you get something so much better, then you don't miss out on, feel that you missed out on anything. You got the higher taste. That is what the Bhagavad-Gita says. That Krishna consciousness gives us that higher taste, because of which we're able to give up that lower taste naturally. So therefore there's no feeling of missing out on something. Any other questions? Okay, so
Please join me in a big round of applause for this.